To begin with, the sweet grass. Will the hungry ox stand in the field and not eat of the sweet grass? Will the owl bite off its own wings? Will the lark forget to lift its body in the air or forget to sing? Will the rivers run upstream? Behold, I say behold, the reliability and the finery and the teachings of this gritty earth gift. Eat bread and understand comfort. Drink water and understand delight. Visit the garden where the scarlet trumpets are opening their bodies for the hummingbirds, who are drinking the sweetness, who are thrillingly gluttonous. For one thing leads to another. Soon you will notice how stones shine underfoot. Eventually, tides will be the only calendar you believe in. And someone's face who you love will be as a star, both intimate and ultimate. And you will be both heart-shaken and respectful. And you will hear the air itself like a beloved whisper, "Oh, let me for a while longer enter the two beautiful bodies of your lungs." The witchery of living is my whole conversation with you, my darlings. All I can tell you is what I know. Look and look again. This world is not just a little thrill for the eyes. It's more than bones. It's more than the delicate wrist and its personal pulse. It's more than the beating of a single heart. Someday, I'm going to ask my friend Paulus, the dancer, the potter, to make me a begging bowl, which I believe my soul needs. And if I come to you, to the door of your comfortable house with unwashed clothes and unclean fingernails, will you put something into it? I would like to take this chance. I would like to give you this chance. We do one thing or another. We stay the same or we change. Congratulations if you have changed. Let me ask you this. Do you think that beauty exists for some fabulous reason? And if you have not been enchanted by this adventure, your life, what would do for you? What I loved in the beginning, I think, was mostly myself. Never mind that I had to, since somebody had to. That was many years ago. Since then, I have gone out from my confinements, though with difficulty. I mean the ones that are thought to rule my heart. I cast them out. I put them on the mush pile. They will be nourishment somehow. Everything is nourishment somehow or another. And I have become the child of the clouds and of hope. I have become the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. I have become older and cherishing what I have learned. I have become younger. And what do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know? Love yourself. Then forget it. Then love the world. I just want to say that when I first read this poem about a year ago, it read to me as beautifully as any psalm, any piyut, any piece of religious poetry you will find in the High Holiday Prayer Book. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we actually read this poem as if it were prayer? And what would it mean to us? So we're really blessed and grateful to have these wonderful teachers to help us understand this and to open up the conversation. So, to all of you, I want to ask, are there lines, words, phrases in this poem that really grabbed you? Is there a meaningful message for you personally that you take as a personal message to you in this prayer poem? If you could, is there something you'd like to share with congregants around this? What speaks to you? So, we have 2 microphones. Jump in when you're ready. Anyone can start.
I keep coming back to the line in section 2, or the 3 lines. And you will hear the air itself like a beloved whisper. Oh, let me for a while longer enter the 2 beautiful bodies of your lungs. For me, that provokes a memory and also a piece of writing that I've loved for a long time. The memory is of a man I knew once who had suffered from a kind of throat cancer and had recovered from it. It was a miraculous recovery, and to look at him, you would never know what the ordeal he had been through. And he said, I take such great pleasure in being able to swallow. And he also went on to reflect how until he had been through his ordeal, it's something he took for granted, almost all of us do. But it seems that Mary Oliver is able to achieve that joy and appreciation, perhaps without having gone through the kind of suffering that this man required to get him to it. And the other thing that these 2 lines, or 3 lines immediately, the entire poem really, but these lines in particular recalled for me is Martin Buber's book, I and Thou. Buber opens, of course his book is quite famous and famous for the impenetrable. He opens with a description of looking at a tree. And when I first read this many, many years ago, I was compelled by it and could not understand it, and just kept, just sat there in my mind. I couldn't understand what he's talking about. And he starts by saying, well, you can contemplate the tree as from a taxonomical perspective, a botanical perspective. You can think as an artist, how are you going to paint it? And then he says, throughout all of this, the tree remains my object and has its place and its time span, its kind and condition. But it can also happen, if will and grace are joined, that as I contemplate the tree, I am drawn into a relation, and the tree ceases to be an it. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no aspect of the mood. It confronts me bodily and has to deal with me as I must deal with it. One should not try to dilute the meaning of relation. Relation is reciprocity. And it took me many years to realize that the reason I couldn't understand this passage is because I was trying to understand it. It's not something that can be understood, it's something that can be felt. And throughout this poem, as throughout prayer, I feel that what is trying to be expressed is something that can't be said, but can only be felt.
So is this akin to the experience of radical amazement?
Yes.
And if so, I'd be very interested in if any of you have thoughts about how we actually give people the experience rather than the intellectual understanding of it. That seems to me to be a huge task.
Well, one thing I heard quite immediately in the first and second stanzas is a call to nature as our ultimate classroom. I wouldn't really pretend to be the one to give radical amazement to another here. I would say, go outside, and I know that's what Mary Oliver did in order to be inspired to write the poetry that she did. That was her synagogue, her church, her temple, to be out in the natural world. And from there, I think that there's a line that I really appreciated, that I think that helped unlock something for me, because sometimes that word radical amazement feels so lofty that I don't even know how to try to reach for that. And what I want to be is open to receiving the wisdom that nature is going to give me by knowing what she knows. There's just, what I hear is actually a deep call to trust, and to be open to a natural rhythm that I often try to subvert or manipulate or drosh on, or in some way understand intellectually, as Rabbi Ilana was hinting at. And so one teaching that I'm really appreciating, that I do think speaks to radical amazement in a way here, is in the first line when she says, or the first stanza where she says, "Behold the reliability and the finery and the teaching of this gritty earth." Reliability and finery are this great odd couple as an and. I don't usually see those words together, reliability and finery. And perhaps what's most amazing is that nature at its best reliably does what it does, and it is awesome. And all we need to do is observe those natural systems and rhythms working in a resilient way, even when there's so much that's broken around us. And maybe that noticing is one step towards the amazement.
I don't really know which part to talk about first, but so the part, I guess, going off of what we were already talking about, this idea, I also really loved that part of the stanza that in number 2 says, "For one thing leads to another. Soon you'll notice how stones shine underfoot. Eventually times will be the only calendar you believe in." And what this made me think about is, when you begin to luxuriate in the world and learn the lessons, then you can see how everything is connected. And it reminded me of a teaching from Rabbi Naomi Lavey in her book, Rabbi, Einstein and the Rabbi, and she was talking about the soul, and she does a lot of writing and talking about the soul. But she talked about how our souls are meant to be connected to each other, that our souls need connection, and when we're able to kind of let go of our own ego, we're able to connect with others on a soul level. And she was talking about how, even though that's an individual experience of letting go of our egos, what our souls crave is the connection of other souls who are also in that state. And so this just reminded me about, I mean, it seemed to jump out of the page for me, particularly in that part of the poem.
So first, I just wanted to say how delighted I am to be sitting with 30 of you. I think I'm the only person who's been on this panel every single year since it was created. And no, I was actually going to say I'm delighted to be able to have a different kind of tables round. But really to learn from friends and colleagues who I've been able to learn with over the course of time, and to have you teach me tonight. So I want to offer 3 insights that initially struck me. The first is, just about anything can be prayer. So I want to give you permission right now that when you come to High Holidays, wherever you are going, whether it's to a shul or outside or at home or wherever, maybe your live stream, that you bring something that will feel like it resonates with you as a tefillah. And if it's not the machzor, that's okay. If it's something else, if it's a poem, if it's this poem, if it's something else, then bring it and use that as your entry point into accessing an otherwise very foreign liturgy that we don't see except once or twice a year. Don't feel limited only to the book, but rather find your book and bring it, whether it's Buber or Rabbi Lavey or whatnot. The second is that my mind did something very interesting as I read this poem. Every time I read a word or a phrase or a stanza, it immediately linked to a passage from a piece of liturgy within the High Holiday Machzor. Like when it said, "Behold," I immediately thought of Hine, which made me think of Hineni. Here I am, here I stand. Whenever I thought of breath, I thought about something connected to the neshama, hanashama lach, and Yom Kippur. And so I almost found myself translating the language of the poem into the language that I'm comfortable with and familiar with. And I recognize that perhaps that's not the entry point or the angle through which everyone can do it, but I wonder if the opposite is also true. Could you take a piece of liturgy that feels foreign and connect it to something that feels familiar? Meaning when you get stuck in the liturgy in the middle of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, could you say, this reminds me of this experience. This reminds me of this book that I read. This reminds me of this interaction I had with a soul as we were yearning to be connected to one another. And use that as the way of drawing yourself in rather than feeling disconnected from. And the last thing is that I spent a lot of time thinking about the title of the poem. To begin with, the sweet grass. I spent a lot of time wondering what happens in the space between those two things. And in particular, to begin with reminded me of the opening lines of Breshit, of creation. And the act of teshuvah and of entering the high holiday experience as an act of self-recreation, or the opportunity to recreate ourselves. And at the beginning of creation in the Torah, it's described as a space that is tohu and bohu. It is formless, it is void, it is chaotic. And it's not just a guarantee that the chaos will turn into life. Something has to happen. Something has to cause that life to be. To begin with does not necessarily guarantee that there will be sweet grass, let alone grass at all. I had this experience earlier this summer after the very heavy rain season, where we walked outside and our front lawn was beautiful. I mean, it was just growing all kinds of crazy, and we really needed it cut. And as soon as it was cut, it looked so pristine. And I had turned off the sprinkler system over the course of the winter, and over the course of the next few months, I forgot to turn it back on. And the grass slowly withered. And then Jenny told me that what happened to the grass that was there, and it was so beautiful. And I realized in that moment that I had to make a choice about whether or not I want to recreate the sweet grass. It won't just happen on its own. I was reading the recent version of Shema magazine, and a dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Stephen Exler from New York, he has a teaching that he brought from the Kli Yakar, from Ephraim of Lunshinsk, and he says that the act of creation is a choice whether we want to live in chaos or plant to be able to create that life. And so I wonder if the opportunity in entering the high holidays is that choice. Will we stay in the chaos, or will we choose to plant something that can cause something beautiful to grow? Will we begin with and stop, or will we work to create the sweet grass? It doesn't just happen. Our need to create and recreate ourselves doesn't just happen. We have to decide what we're going to do in our beginning.
Congratulations if you've changed. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'm hearing around the table is, and I'm quite sure each of you talks about this in your own way and models it in your own way, that people may not know or sometimes forget that the experience of prayer or the experience of ritual or the experience of life is more than only intellectual. That there's another component, another part of human perception and awareness that comes from a different faculty. I don't know what we would call it. So many people would call it spiritual, or soulful, or mystery, or beingness. But there's that. Wouldn't it be delightful to be able to capture that in our experience? And Rabbi Laura, I participated in your Elul class, and I have to say, when you took Psalm 30 and asked us to physically embody it, like, my heart broke open. It was no longer the head. And by the way, I spent way too much time in my head. So, but it was so powerful emotion. My heart really broke open. Those kinds of experiences are things maybe Mary Oliver is pointing us to. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I delight in imagining the body also as an instrument of prayer. And Rabbi Corey, when you were talking about like what you could bring to shul or bring to your high holiday experience, whatever might be happening on the bima or in the Torah service, one thing that I immediately thought of was the body. We each bring our bodies very presently to prayer. And one of the lines that also just called out for embodiment or physicality to me, and also felt like something, if there was a message I want our congregation to hear, and I think they already hear it, but it deserves reverberation and repetition. It was the line, "Remember your own heartbeat is part of a chorus, even if what you can hear loudest and most immediate is the pulse of your own wrist." So I tried this with my partner, Jay. I tried hearing the pulse of his wrist. It made me cry. It was just a very intimate experience of hearing a person who I know and love well, hearing their own heartbeat in their wrist. And there was this vulnerability to it, and a real localized physicality of feeling somebody else's being existing right next to mine. And that really did feel like prayer in a really heart-opening way, and also in a way that reminded me how not alone I am, and that whatever intellectual experience I'm having that is different than what he's having or what any of you are having, that we each have this pulse that's kind of a collective drumbeat we're a part of. So I love that as one thing we can bring to shul with us and to check in with as we move through prayer and as we let ourselves be moved.
I love the idea of something we could bring to our high holiday, our days of awe experience that would actually connect us to something deeper. And also taking the words found in the prayer book and seeing what images or experiences of ours, memories, texts, what they spur for us, what they light up for us. It's interesting to me, and for me this is one of the most powerful parts of this poem, is that what Mary Oliver wants to bring to her life is a begging bowl. Is a begging bowl. That struck me as hugely interesting and actually quite moving. So, what do you think this begging bowl business is about? And you're all going to be busy on the bima on these holidays, but I'm going to be sitting in the pews. And if you were sitting in a pew, what would you want to bring with you? What would you choose to bring?
I was also struck by that begging bowl. I feel that throughout this poem, she's expressing such vulnerability. And her closing question also really stuck with me. And what do I risk to tell you this? Which is all I know. And when I read that, my mind filled with Ilana. It seems like she's risking everything.
I'm telling you the most powerful thing I know, and what if you can't hear it?
And when you said just now, what would you bring to the keys? I'm reminded of an essay in Heschel's book, Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity, in which he says, when you show up for synagogue, you know exactly what's going to happen. Nobody's going to fall down on the floor crying. Nobody's going to burst out into hysterical laughter. We're just going to say our prayers and go home. And he's railing about this. Show up with your vulnerability. Be willing to burst into tears. When you fall down on the floor for the Aleinu, let your heart out. So that's what I would bring, not something physical. I would bring a readiness to be vulnerable.
when I read this part about the begging bowl, it just reminded me that all of us, that we each have such a capacity for good, and how in the world that we live in right now, it's so hard to remember that. Every little thing that happens annoys us or pisses us off or just, and we have such a capacity for good and to make the world better. And I think part of what's hard about the High Holy Days, in particular, to what Rabbi Corey was saying about the Machzor, like this is unfamiliar language that we're lucky if we really remember from one year to the next what all of it means. And so when we have the opportunity to prepare, as we do, part of what we're doing here tonight, congratulations, we can remember that. We can remember what it feels like and is like to be good, even though throughout the days when we're sitting in shul, kind of reminded of all the things that we've done wrong and where we weren't good. And so when she's offering this to us as saying, what are you going to put in this bowl? I guess it just reminded me that we need to also put in the positive, the things where we did do well this past year. And it also caused me to think about, in real terms, how would we act upon that if someone showed up in front of us with a bowl? And would we be the one to offer something freely? Or would we be the one to hold back a little bit? And is that our true intention? Can we look at it in a different way? So seeing how the opportunity to help someone else, is not a burden, or it doesn't have to feel like a burden. I think in our best selves, we want to think, oh yes, I'll offer everything I have, and I'm just I know what I would do, but I think there's a little part of each one of us that says, maybe not this time. I'm not quite there yet. And so I feel like this part really challenges us to connect with the core of who we are and who we really, really, really want to be. And for me, that's what this whole experience of the High Holy Days is about.
Rabbi Lisa, do you have, as part of your synagogue tradition, or maybe your own personal tradition on Yom Kippur, to maybe skip one of the Al-Chet confessionals, and instead of doing for the sin of this and the sin of that, have people do for the good act that I did, for the mitzvah that I did, for the kindness that I did?
Yes, we do that. We do Hakarat HaTov. There's the new Mishkan HaNefesh, the Reform Machzor. There's a pretty extensive section about that. We've also started doing that on Shabbat too. We come for services to pray for healing for people in our lives, and we come to say Kaddish. But our places of worship are also a place to hold the good things that happen and how we have contributed to making the world better. So we've taken that as a year-round practice.
That's great. Yeah, please.
So your comment made me think about first a vidui that was written by Rav Kook called Vidui HaMashlim, which is the vidui where you confess all the things that you have done over the course of this year. Just a sampling of it. We have loved, we have cried, we have redeemed, we have spoken beauty, we have trusted, we have striven, we have remembered, we have hugged, we have enjoyed books, we have created, we have desired, we have fought for what is right, we have pointed out the good, we have attempted, we have tried to see, we have done what we have been commanded, we have interpreted, we have been righteous sometimes, we have called in your name, we have wanted, we have been happy, we have supported. And then Rabbi Avi Weiss wrote a remake of that a few years ago. And so I think there is something to acknowledge the positive and not just that which we have missed the mark.
That's stunningly beautiful.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and I've tried to weave it in also as a practice. I'm happy to share with anyone who would like. I just wanted to go back to your begging bowl question for a second. Mm-hmm. So I read the begging bowl almost like a page of Talmud, that particular part, where the begging bowl was in the center, and the rest of the stanza was the commentary around the begging bowl. And I titled this section number 4, Ki Hine Kachomer, which is the piyut that we recite on Erev Yom Kippur, and after Kol Nidre, that talks about likening ourselves to the clay in the hand of the potter. And each stanza goes through these different materials that we can take and fashion and mold and create something with, or perhaps just in their rawest form, and asking us to kind of imagine what it would be like to see ourselves in our rawest form. On some level, I was thinking if I were to bring something, I'm a tactile person, I would want to bring a fidget that might allow me to connect the inside with the physical, something that is a material that would allow me to not just get through whatever piece of antsiness I'm feeling in that moment, but also to maybe connect with what's going on internally with externally. And then I thought maybe my hands were actually the most tangible and concrete and accessible things for me to hold. But I was contrasting that with the next part, which is, and if I come to you to the door of your comfortable house with unwashed clothes and unclean fingernails, will you put something in it? And I wondered for a moment if maybe we show up to Yom Kippur in the wrong way. We show up, we're all clean, and we took a shower, and we're wearing our finest white, and we look beautiful. Yes, there are elements of deathly rituals in there that liken Yom Kippur to the end of life, but I wonder if we could show up to Yom Kippur dirty, like bearing all, showing the grime that has been under our fingernails from the hard work that we've done. And if our fingers are clean, maybe we haven't worked hard enough. And that the begging bowl in and of itself, in some ways is proof of what it means to really work and to struggle and to be vulnerable, because oftentimes the begging bowl is empty. But what you look at is the bowl, you don't look at the person. We often look and see if there's any money inside the person's bowl that's begging, and how often do we look up and see them in the eyes and see the face of the person who is standing before us and recognize that that person could also be me. And so I wonder in some ways if we should show up in our rawest form, not put together, because we're not put together. And I think it's okay in that moment to just stand there authentically and vulnerably for who we are.
This unwashed and unclean stuff, it's very powerful. Can we show up raw? Can we show up as we are? When we come to your comfortable, beautiful house with all the beautiful furniture and the great appointment, and it's all gorgeous, and we come as we are, can you see us in all of our imperfections? After reading this poem, and for a very special occasion, I asked my partner to make me a begging bowl. And my only request was I didn't care really what it looked like as long as it was visibly imperfect. I just wanted something that said, I am imperfect. And one of the things that I've carried in, at least sometimes physically, but often mostly in my memory to Yom Kippur, it is an essay by the psychologist and psychoanalyst Alfred Adler, who was a close friend of Freud's before their friendship disintegrated. And he wrote an essay called "The Courage to be Imperfect." How do we face it? Rabbi Lavey?
I'll write that down, but I'll write it after. I also was really drawn by that line. Showing up with unwashed clothes and unclean fingernails, there's such a childlike quality to it. And actually throughout the poem, you have this sense of she's looking at the world like a child. And then at the end, she spells it out for us explicitly. I've become older, and cherishing what I've learned, I have become younger. And when I reached that line, I realized that I'm too young to actually fully understand this poem. I have a sense of what she's talking about, and I can see it in my father, but I'm not there. This childlike wonder that is actually deeply informed by experience. I have to confess I haven't gotten it, but I'm getting a sense of it.
So thinking about stanza 6, it says, "Let me ask you this, do you also think that beauty exists for some fabulous reason? And if you had not been enchanted by this adventure, your life, what would do for you? What would do for you? What are you hoping
to get, what do you think you are deserved or owed other than what we have all around us? When we moved here just over 5 years ago, my husband and I were with our one son looking at houses, and we were looking at this house in Millbrae that was looking out over the bay. It's way, up in the hills. And I looked to the woman who was showing the house, and I said, gosh, I can't imagine being able to look at this view every single day. And she's like, yeah, I've lived here 20 years, I don't even notice it anymore. And it just blew me away. I mean, I had moved here from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which has its own beauty, but not this, not the ability to look out and see for miles and miles and miles, and blue water and mountain across the way, like just unbelievable beauty that's in our area that we have the privilege to see every single day on a big scale. But then thinking about the beauty that we get to see every single day that we do walk by. I do have 2 young children, and they do stop with radical amazement all the time. We're taking a walk, and they look at the tiniest flower that's white and the tiniest flower that's purple, and they see that, and they help me to see that, and I would not have been able to know that or feel that probably since I was a child. And so I just love this idea that beauty is made for enjoyment, and yet at the same time it's to help us understand what kind of privilege it is to live in the time that we're living. Whether it's seeing something that someone created, like art or any other beauty, or to understand a brilliant mind, a person who has the ability to either put words together in a way, I mean, this is a great example, or just to see a flower that's bloomed for the first time and the last time. And so it's these moments that are created, they're what give our lives adventure in a certain kind of way. And what would do for you? If this isn't good enough, what would it be? I just love that question.
Ilana, thank you for, I think both of you kind of raised these questions that I feel like part of the how, the enormity of the how arrive at that place that it sounds like your father is living in now, where he has access to an amazement and a presence that maybe your children also have access to, and here we are in the in-between, wading through, and what is our process, what is our real work, what are we waking up to in order to know we are coming closer and closer to being those who experience amazement so readily and so regularly. And one answer that Mary Oliver brings in this poem that I feel is so resonant with the process we are all about to go through and maybe have already started this Elul. It comes in paragraph 7, I think, and she talks about what it is she had to let go of. It was not only what she had to notice and absorb and appreciate, but also the work she did to really let go. And I love the language she writes there. I have gone out from my confinements, though with difficulty. I mean the ones that thought to rule my heart. I cast them out, I put them on the mush pile. They'll be nourishment somehow. Everything is nourishment somehow or another. And I love that casting out of confinements. When we do tashlich, we throw into the water our, the language of sin, those things that we deeply regret or are beating our chests over, feeling like great mistakes that we have made in the year or things that we're holding on to. And she really softened that language of sin for me by giving a different word, confinements. How many, who doesn't live with confinements that are at least in part their own making? Perhaps that comes from a story that once served me about what I needed to do to protect myself or to succeed or to advance in some way, and how refreshing to have this opportunity to go out from the confinements and to cast them out
and to hear that they're getting composted. You know, that all of the effort that I went to in those confinements to believe those were the right choices at the time and they served me well or they led to some measure of success, that wasn't wasted effort, that wasn't wasted time, and I can arrive at a more spacious place and give that effort away, and it'll just get recycled back into this living system that we're all a part of, and maybe someone else will pick up that story when it serves them. For me, it was a really helpful call to reimagine the ritual of Tashlich, or the casting out and letting go of those things that are weighing heavy from the year, and that maybe that is part of taking those steps towards that ultimate place where she lands, where she's feeling that cherishing of what's left that she's learned.
I just want to draw on what you said because it resonated with me very strongly. Part of her coming out of her confinement is becoming the friend of the enemy. And that's something that I can relate to in maturity. In that I can remember things that I used to hate about myself that I'm now able to accept and see as the flip sides of my strength. And I think that's a crucial part of teshuvah, the work not just of the season, but of the entire year, is learning to become friend of the enemy in yourself. And the more we are accepting and able to channel the parts of ourselves that we don't like into doing good, at least I have found, the more I'm able to be accepting of people who once irritated me, to see their limitations and beyond them to see what's beautiful about them.
So just to be clear, you're reading this not only the friend of the enemy who is someone else, it's the friend of the enemy the way I've treated myself as an enemy. I've been able to befriend myself.
Oh, I see it as both.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, before we open it up to everybody, and we'll continue the conversation, I just want to draw our attention to the last two lines. And what do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know, which I take to mean, I'm telling you my deepest truth. If I have one thing to teach, this is it. Love yourself, then forget it. Then love the world. How does this strike you? What do you make of it?
You asking us or them?
You. We'll turn to them in just a minute.
When I read the last two lines, I thought of two immediate things. One is an unwillingness, a perpetual unwillingness to let go of anything that's happened in the past. Almost to the point where we hold on to something that happened years and years and years ago, and it still feels as fresh a wound then as it does now. And our inability to be able to let ourselves go, to even give ourselves permission to forgive ourselves and to be able to let go, even if we can't seek forgiveness from someone else. And I wonder what it would look like, especially in the world and the climate that we live in, to be able to just let go of some of these things, because they're actually preventing us from being able to be in relationship with other people, because we can't even enter into a space because they believe something different, they vote a different way. We can't even be in relationship with one another. And in many ways, perhaps the hardest part of being in the high holidays is not the fear about what the rabbi is going to speak about, but it's what it's going to do to us when we want to talk with someone else about what the experience was in that space. And the other was, there was a beautiful song that was written by Idan Reichel, who's a famous Israeli musician, and he wrote it as a love letter, if you will, to his wife. And the title of it was called Lisloach Velishkoach, that you should forgive and that you should forget. And I just wanted to read a piece of it because it reminded me of that question that she poses at the end. What do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know? Love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. Like, get to the bigger, deeper thing. And he says, it seems that time passed between us, something in the gaze, something was dropped, time for cleansing oneself, time for self-reckoning. When the tears are flowing once more, it's time for memories, to forgive and to forget, again to hope, to live until the last moment, to dance with all one's strength. And it seems that time has passed us by. Something closed, something opened. Time to spread a wing, the rain has already washed us, and it seems that time has passed by. We have changed, a wrinkle on the face already less fragile. Something hardened and running less to the fire. When the tears are flowing once more, it's time for the memories, to forgive and to forget, again to hope. I wonder if our inability to get past some of these things is suppressing our ability to hope once again, and to imagine the vision of what we can create together, both for ourselves and for our world. When we can get back to that place, we can restore that sense of hope that allows us perhaps the fortitude to begin the hard work of reimagining who we are, of recreating who we are, and then doing the same thing for our world.
I read this last line a little bit differently. I read it as thinking about growing from a child to, I don't know, an adult at whatever stage. About love yourself is this idea of confidence that I think we have when we're very young, and then we know as we grow older. It's something that teenagers struggle with so much. The idea of loving yourself, loving who you are, and that we need that experience of trying to love who we are, and I think it's a lifelong struggle for some people. So we have to love ourselves, and then we can't become haughty, and we have to forget it. You know, that loving yourself is important to a point, and then we have to forget it, and then from that love, we have to, from the love that we've learned about ourselves, that's what we need to use to be out in the world. And so I was thinking about this as a life cycle, kind of these three sentences. Love yourself, then forget it, then love the world.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yes, I love that interpretation, and I also want to expand that little 3-word, then forget it. You know, that's not a throwaway. There's work in the forgetting as well. And what is it that we are doing that we forget? And I think she gives us clues along the way in this poem. One of the things we can do to forget the all-consuming self is to fall in love with the world and its natural beauty, and to get outside and to get out of our heads, as we've been raising in different points. So that's one way we forget all about the story of self that feels so primal on a regular basis, and kind of the first and last thought in the mind. So I think that's one way that we forget. And then I also go back to that begging bowl that we bring to others, that along the way in life, one of the ways we forget about, you know, the self, I'll speak for myself, the way that I move beyond loving myself in a very protective and polished and positive way is to find myself in a position of ultimate need and really needing to be vulnerable with somebody else. And that's in fact when I forget that it's all about loving me, and all of a sudden I'm belonging to someone else, and I'm belonging to something larger than myself. And that's such a precious forgetting, because it joins me, and it helps me to then expand my capacity to love, because I've received a really deep kind of love that isn't earned, it's just for being alive. And that's really, I think, part of the forgetting as well, forgetting about the self that is so central and so precious and so worth striving for. And then another piece of that forgetting
is then to go on the adventure with others, and that then once again we're going deeper and deeper into loving the world with more and more wisdom. So, and there is some risk in that. There's some risk because not everyone that you'll approach in your effort to forget yourself and love the world is going to respond in the ways that you hope they will. And it sounds like she's telling us it's a risk worth taking anyways.
I want to answer your question by going back to something Rabbi Corey said right at the beginning. When you were talking about, you read each of these pieces as connecting to the prayer book, and can we do it do the inverse? If the prayer book is difficult for us, can we use the prayer book to connect into these sets of feelings? And I want to spell out one of the reasons why I think the prayer book is often, why for so many of us it is hard to read it as poetry the way Mary Oliver reads. And the first line is staring us in the face. Will the hungry ox stand in the field and not eat of the sweet grass? The first line of Isaiah's very first prophecy. So that was the Haftarah 2 weeks ago? A few weeks ago. An ox knows its owner and asks its master's feeding trough. Israel does not know, my people takes no thought. I actually think I suspect she's referencing Isaiah, right? Why does she start with an ox? But Isaiah's ox knows its owner, and it knows its master's feeding trough is very controlled, contained, and her ox is standing in the field, eating of the sweet grass. And for so much of history, the world was uncontrolled and scary, and spirituality meant seeking security, seeking order and control. And we live look around us. Look how structured and ordered the buildings we live in are, the cars, the roads. For our spirituality, we seek the opposite. We seek to escape from all of that order and structure, and we look for the sweet grass, and we look for the lark that sings. And so I think that last line, love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. I think that the prayer book starts with the last piece. It doesn't take us through the loving yourself and the forgetting it, because the ancients perhaps didn't need to start with those stages, but needed to start with the loving the world, loving God, loving the universe. And so the challenge for us is to use the prayer book from the place that we're at as an entree into the full process of our modern time.
Wow. Corey? Rabbi Corey?
So I thought of Isaiah initially, and then I thought of something different. I read those first questions as all rhetorical, like could this even be possible, that these things would happen?
Which is how Isaiah means it.
Right, which is how Isaiah means it. And then in the liturgy, I read it through the lens of Unatana Tokef. And the line of like a shepherd who shepherds their flock and kind of counts us, like this very tender and compassionate moment. But I actually read it rhetorically. Could we imagine that God is no longer going to shepherd us? Like you could easily feel in this world like God has abandoned us, and that why would I bother connecting with the liturgy at all, because I'm coming to a space where I don't feel like I'm even being seen anymore. Almost to the flip side of what you were saying, that at the very end, the love yourself, well, I want to love myself, but I don't know if anyone loves me anymore, so just forget it. I want to love the world, but I don't know if anyone loves the world anymore, so just forget it. And then I wonder, does God love me anymore? Or did God forget it? Does God still love the world? Or forget it? And I wonder, that can't be. These questions are not rhetorical. Like, they can't be this way because we imagine God as this eternal shepherd that guides us, right? And we hold up God as Din, as judgment in Unatana Tokef, but also God as Rachamim, as merciful and compassionate. And so in some ways, giving ourselves permission to love ourselves again, forget it, but also not forget the world, has to also be a reminder that God is perhaps doing the same thing. And perhaps that is another layer that's woven into the liturgy too.
So we're going to give all these lovely folks an opportunity to jump in. I invite you to offer your questions or to offer your observations about the poem. Maybe you'd like to get our rabbis to reflect upon. The only thing that we ask is that you be brief and to the point. Whether it's a question or it's a comment, be as brief as you can so that we can fit in as many as possible. Yes? Yeah. And speak loudly.
Comment on Rabbi Helfand's comment. We can't let go of our past. I'd like to comment on Rabbi Helfand's comment that we can't let go of our past wounds, failures, memories. To open up and relate that to the last line of the first paragraph of stanza 7. Since then I have gone out from my confinements, though with difficulty. I think if I was editing that, I would have inserted my self-generated confinements.
Nice. Yes, sir.
I think the poem has many elements to it, which of course makes it interesting. I think it's much more than about the self, and in fact, this whole notion of being aware of others and the act of giving starts to feel like the act of receiving when you participate fully. So, and also the notion that I'm giving you this chance. In other words, that there is always an opportunity to be aware of other people's needs and to try to meet those needs and rise above yourself. And to me, that's a life lesson. It's a good lesson to renew at this time of the year as well.
Lovely. Yes.
I thought that the begging bowl stanza 4 was really interesting too. The word that stuck out with me was someday. Like, when's that day going to be? And I think that's the question that I think we look at every year at this time, which is, why not now?
Yeah. Am I ready? Yeah. Sir? Yeah.
This poem was incredible, and it's probably the first poem that I've heard or read in 15 years, other than the sports page. And it hit me. And what hit me was there was a fluidity in it. It wasn't intellectual. It wasn't like an analysis of something. This woman had lived through life in a very deep, very honest, and probably, I don't know her story, a very difficult way. And she's come through the other side. And the last thing I want to say is, normally when I go to Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, I try, this is the question I have, to get closer to myself, to observe myself, to be more conscious of myself, and to have those special moments. And they don't seem to happen. And it's just sort of like a meditation. It just doesn't go there. And the only time it did happen, I forget, the story of Hannah. Is it Hannah? Yeah. So I'm bored to death, go to Hannah, and I start crying because it was so touching. So it's something that I guess we have to go through our own journey through the davening to see what hits us or not.
Any of you have any thoughts or comments about what we've just been hearing?
Only that I really resonate with that kind of like holy disappointment of anticipating a peak moment of spiritual awakening or even just a connection, a closeness to your own soul, a closeness to God, and waiting and preparing and hoping and putting such expectation on a moment that at least on its surface, isn't what you'd hoped it was, isn't what you'd hoped to feel. I've been there too, many a time, and I think that sometimes I feel God's humor in the High Holy Days, that there are those moments we prepare to stand on high and receive, and we're so eager and prepared for this moment, that perhaps it's not the moment, or perhaps there was so much energy put into the anticipation that the openness to receive comes at another idle and quiet moment when a still small voice can kind of slip in, and then there's actually quite a lot of noise and quite a lot of busyness that enwrap the High Holidays, and it doesn't mean that they can't be deeply spiritually resonant, and I think that disappointment itself is a kind of awakening. If you find yourself in that, feeling just disconnected, and maybe that's part of what your soul is doing to wake up, to then be prepared for a moment like being surprised by this story of Hannah and just feeling yourself cry. And I do resonate with her story. I think it's such an intimate story, and I think one of my yearnings every year is to connect to those moments of intimate, heartbreaking open within a rhythm of ceremony that doesn't always have that has such decorum. It's rare when we find those real moments of just piercing the heart. So to be awake for those and know that that's what you're really seeking is really incredible self-wisdom.
I feel like what you just described is the story of Hannah. The waiting and the anticipation and the frustration and then getting to this point of breaking open and crying. I mean, when you were saying it struck me that you were just telling that story in a certain kind of way. And then the other thing that I was thinking too is that the Machzor is one book, one set of prayers that's supposed to reach every single person, ? And so I feel like it's not going to reach every single person. Each one of those pages is not going to get inside of ourselves, but we have so many pages to go through, right? And so much time to get to that point. And I can't expect that every single page, every single moment is going to reach me, but it might reach the person sitting next to me, and we all find something within it. I really thank you for sharing that in this group of people that you don't know. So thank you very much.
What's your name?
Ken.
What is it?
Ken.
Ken?
Ken.
Ken.
I do have a last name, Leventhal.
Nice to meet you, Ken Leventhal. So I was thinking of a couple things as you were speaking. One is that I applaud you for continuing to try. I know that so often we have the yearning to have that experience and it doesn't come year after year after year, and so we stop trying. Reminds me of the joke about the person who wanted to win the lottery but they forgot to buy a ticket. And so I would say keep trying. The second thing I would say is I don't know that we're always going to be able to prepare ourselves for when it happens. And there's something about creating a sense of awareness that it could come at any time, especially when we're not anticipating it. And that when it does happen, to pause long enough to be mindful in that space and be present with it. And let it really wash over you and embrace it. And I think that those moments probably pass us by all the time, not just on the High Holy Days, but throughout our lives, and we haven't paused long enough to really embrace them. And the third thing I would say is, let the High Holidays not be about the High Holidays. Let them be about creating a sense of awareness of what it's like to live each and every day with a sense of intention that you try to bring to the High Holy Days. I think that too often we are hoping that for 3 days of the year, we'll come and we will leave and it will be the most amazing experience. And there's so many of those moments that happen in the space between. I remember, I think it's Rabbi Eisner said this one time, that he said, people always come to hear the sermon on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they forget, I give some really great sermons over the course of the year. And on some level, that's a total Rabbi Eisner thing. And on some level, I feel like he's right, because there are those moments throughout our lives, whether it's in the sports section, or it's in shul, or it's out in nature, and we have to make sure that we're opening our eyes and our hearts to feeling those too. And when they do happen, to really open ourselves up to what it can do to transform us. And sometimes it's holding it, and then being able to dissect it and understand it as it unfolds for you, because sometimes we experience it and the meaning of it doesn't actually strike us until days or weeks or months or even years later.
Any other questions? Yes.
So when you spoke at the beginning, sorry,
Me? Yeah, Lavey, Rabbi Lavey.
you spoke about your heart breaking open, and I immediately thought of a book that I love this time of year called The Days Between by Marsha Bach.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a poem with prayer in there on that E of that prayer, and it talks about the day is closing and now we're opening, and the end of it is just what you said, and my heart broke open.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were familiar with that one.
What a very interesting way to end Yom Kippur, don't you think? We're saying the gates are closing when in fact the whole experience has been designed for the hearts to open at the end. Interesting. Sir?
Yes, going to the last line of the poem, love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. I'm comparing that to the famous saying from the Pirkei Avot, which is, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, then what am I? So the question is, loving oneself and loving the world, are those mutually exclusive or are they interdependent?
Any thoughts?
She does refer to the fact that it comes back to being earthly.
Right, exactly.
That word interdependence, I would say, to me, that anchors this entire poem. That there is something deeply, intrinsically interdependent in every process that we are a part of, everything we witness in the natural world, every effort that we make to love ourselves is in fact feeding the world, feeding those around us, and that they're not mutually exclusive. So I do think that she's playing with us a little bit in that, if we try to read linearly through that last line and imagine it's step 1, 2, and 3. I do think that there's something perhaps more cyclical about it. If I'm, and that they're not mutually exclusive, and our attention is limited. In each moment, we have to choose, and that's one of the great challenges and responsibilities we have as human beings. Where do we put our attention? And so, I do think that there are some beautiful tools. I'm thinking of the Metta loving kindness meditation, which is it's a Buddhist meditation, but certainly has been used frequently in Jewish circles as well, that begins with loving the self, and it is, and you expand from there to really focusing deep attention on love for a specific other, and then widening that to another specific other who's more challenging, and then widening that even more to others that you've never met. And it is cyclical, and it does begin with the self and expand outward, and then perhaps it goes inward again and it goes outward again. So thank you for raising that. I think that first of all, the interdependence feels like it's everywhere in this poem, and in our call to the High Holy Days. There's a reason why none of us do this in a vacuum, even though each of us is coming to a heightened prayer experience with uniquely different needs. That it's really one experience I can't quite imagine doing alone. I can imagine a way of celebrating Shabbat alone. I can imagine a way, I certainly have had powerful prayer experiences alone. But have I gone through the Chagim without really standing in community and standing dependent on others? I'm not so sure. So that's one thing I'm thinking of, and also that you're helping me to see that last line not so linearly and as more of a cycle that we are constantly going through.
So any of you have any final things you'd like to say about this experience, about this poem, about the days of awe? Any final words you want to offer?
I have one more question. How was this poem chosen?
How long do you have?
Okay. Well said.
I chose the poem. The poem was gifted to me by one of my dearest friends. The poem comes with a very long story, which I will happily share with you afterwards. But not at this moment. And since we're having another question, Cindy, you had a question or a comment.
It was a comment in the part about the goal, the last line that I would like to give you this chance, I think was very powerful. That I think that by showing you my unnice parts, by you see that the opportunity to see a person not just their good side, but all of them enriches the person who's given the chance to do it.
So combining that with the comment that Ken made, maybe what Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, all of it is all about is that the mystery is presenting itself to us, saying, I would like to give you this chance. What will we do with this one fabulous moment? Maybe. Friends, we can continue for a long time. And I'm so delighted you have so much to say. But I do want to ask our teachers here this evening if they have any one last line or comment or insight that you'd like to share before we close.
I think a phrase we haven't used, but we sort of touched on, is that the poem, as she ages, she's dissolving her ego. She's letting go of ego. And love yourself and forget it. It's not that you're gone, but your ego is gone. Give until giving feels like receiving. The separation between I and thou is gone. And then I want to call us back to the second passage. Someone's face whom you love will be as a star, both intimate and ultimate. Our sages, starting in medieval times really, up until the present, many Jewish texts talk about finding God in the Ein Sof, in the never-ending, and in the Ayin, in the nothing. And Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik wrote a beautiful article about majesty and humility, about how we can find God in awe and wonder, and we can find God in the tiny spaces where we feel very weak and vulnerable. And both of these are experiences of losing yourself. Whether you lose yourself into a small place or lose yourself into a place of grandeur. And I think there's space for both of those experiences in the pages of our liturgy.
Anybody else?
So in the version of the text that I think we received, at the very bottom of the poem, there was an asterisk with a definition of the word witchery, which is in stanza number 3. And I was struck that of all of the things that we probably could have used some Rashi on, that witchery was the one that was chosen. And the definition was a compelling power exercised by beauty, eloquence, or other attractive or fascinating qualities. And while we perhaps don't believe in witches or witchery in Jewish tradition, if you read it in the context of the whole first part of the stanza, the witchery of living is my whole conversation with you, my darlings. All I can tell you is what I know. And it made me think about juxtaposing the idea of Rosh Hashanah Yikatemun U'Yom Tzom Kippur Yachatemun, that were written, if you will, in pencil and then inscribed in ink. And the thing that has the ability to change how we live comes at the end of that passage, which is Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah, repentance and prayer, both, I guess, physical acts of prayer with internal acts of prayer, and tzedakah, acts of kindness. And the idea that perhaps the power that we have comes in our ability to converse with and be in relationship with one another, which goes both in terms of the spoken word, but also in the silent listening and in the doing. And I wonder if one message of the poem that I take away is that we need to go back to doing one of the most great gifts of witchery that we have, which is talking to each other, but also listening to ourselves and to each other. And so I wonder if the beauty and the eloquence or the fascinating qualities of ourselves could reemerge once again if we're willing to sit and be in dialogue rather than turning our backs to each other and to really seeing the other after this experience.
So also looking at number 3, and really this whole poem for me, it reminds me, and what I think this season is about, is recognizing what a gift our lives are. Recognizing the opportunities that we have to be a kind person and make the impact in the world that we want to make. And this last line, you have this day, and maybe another, and maybe still another, reminds us of the Yom Kippur Rosh Hashanah liturgy of Unatana Tokef, that ultimately our life is short, and uncertainty is real, and still we have to recognize the gift of this life that we have.
No? Little one?
I'm still sitting with more questions and answers at this moment. I'm still stuck with your question, Rabbi Lavey, about what is that going to bring to shul, and is it going to be my dirty fingernails, or what small gesture of resistance to the otherwise refinery and real grandeur of the moment am I going to bring to remind me of the wisdom we've collected in this room to be who we are and to come vulnerable? And what is it that my soul needs to do to come vulnerable to these high holy days and to welcome your vulnerability as well?
So friends, in just a minute or two, I'm going to ask Rabbi Corey to lead us through the ritual and guide us in the ritual of hearing the sound of the shofar, which is traditional during this month of Elul before the days of awe. But first, I'm going to ask you, please, to join me in thanking our 4 teachers and rabbis who have given us extraordinary teachings tonight. I hope you will agree with me that our conversation has been deep, it's been profound, it's been insightful, and it has given us so many things to take with us when we walk into our synagogues or to the top of a mountain or to a beach or sitting in our living room when we're thinking about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Please join me in appropriately thanking them.
And thank you to our fearless leader, Rabbi Lavey, for his leadership, his wisdom, his Torah, and for giving us a new piece of liturgy to take with us into these high holy days. If you're able to, please stand.
Shabbat Tova u'Metzukah. Please do us the kindness of taking 3